Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is January 17th, 2025, and let's get to the news and map updates happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? So I'll quickly and briefly talk about the map changes, and then I'll cover the historic UK-Ukraine agreement that was done yesterday when the British Prime Minister went to visit Kyiv. And last, I want to talk about a possible bank run in Russia this year. So stick around and we'll cover all of these important updates. So of course, I want to talk about Pokrovsk, and the situation continues to be difficult for the Ukrainian military here. You can see that Russia's strategy continues to be the same. They're trying to circumvent, flank the Ukrainian positions, and slowly they're gaining some ground. So that is expected. Ukraine right now has adopted a strategy. It's pretty much been the strategy, the default strategy for the past year, realizing that they don't have the resources, the manpower capable of conducting offensives against the Russian military. I think that was a realization after the 2023 counteroffensive that Russia was able to rearm, was able to commit to a very big defense. And that made things very difficult for the Ukrainians. They realized that it's a very energy intensive offensive if they go that way. And that there is going to be far more worst outcomes than positive outcomes if Ukraine continues adopting the same type of style of warfare that they were pressured to do back in the summer of 2023, which ultimately didn't work out. And rather, Ukraine now has adopted a strategy of picking their fights and trying to inflict maximum casualties to the Russians. Because also there was a realization in the summer and fall of 2023 that Russia simply didn't care about its losses. I think we all understand that very well, that Russia simply disregards soldiers themselves. Are completely fine with dying. And there was a video that was shared last week, which was like 3 or 5 minutes long, of a Russian soldier driving on a quad bike. And he called it the road of death, and certainly it was a road of death because he was filming it with a GoPro, and you can see the sheer destruction. Now, this was somewhere around, I think, the area of Pokrovsk, of Avdiivka and Pokrovsk, where through that 5-minute video, you could see just the utter destruction and death on that road. Multiple BMPs, MTLBs, different types of vehicles, obliterated, burning, dead Russian soldiers littering the entire road. You could see some Russian soldiers also walking towards, the front line, and it looked apocalyptic. And that's the reality, is that the Russians, you can see that even by seeing all that, they continue moving forward. And so with that realization, Ukraine understood that they simply have to pick their fights and make sure that they inflict maximum casualties on the Russian military. So that's going to be the default situation until there's going to be collapse, because that's going to happen. And I'm very optimistic. Some of you may say you're too optimistic, Chris, that, Russia, look at them, they're advancing. But I am very optimistic with the Russian economy going pretty much on fire over the next few months, that this collapse could happen this year within the Russian state. Because again, what is the motivation of these Russian soldiers? It's purely financial. All of these Russians that are willingly signing their contracts with the Russian military, they're doing it purely because of financial incentives, most of them. It's not because of ideological incentives. Yes, there are some of them, but the majority of these Russian soldiers are doing this because they have massive sign-up bonuses. Their payments are extremely generous, to the point that they can cover, if they were to work in an ordinary job in Russia, it would take them a year to make the type of money they can make in Ukraine in a month or two. So this is a big deal. And so as soon as the Kremlin loses its capability to pay these Russian soldiers money, there's going to be a huge collapse within the military, upheaval, discontent, Russian soldiers asking themselves throughout different ranks, why are we doing this, right? So when that happens, I do believe that there is extremely high chances of the Russian military just collapsing. So that's what Ukraine is betting on. Heavy sanctions continue to inflict maximum casualties on the Russian military, with the hopes that sooner or later, the house of cards is just going to fall apart. And the silver lining again, yes, you can see that Russia is continuing with its limited gains on the western side of Pokrovsk, and also continues applying pressure around the area of Kurakhove and Velika Novosilka. But the Ukrainians have made statements. I've been following some Ukrainian soldiers on Telegram who have been saying this week that they've noticed just a drastic reduction of armored vehicles. The Russians have no more, according to their statements, armored vehicles. So now they're using exclusively, whether it be dirt bikes, scooters, going on foot. That's their assaults now. And they're not efficient, right? Like, you could make an assault on MMTLB much faster, much more efficient. You could carry a lot more supplies, and they simply can't do that because they're storming now in civilian vehicles, these Soviet Lof vans, scooters, which makes things very difficult for the Russians in terms of capturing territory quickly. And combined with the cold weather, it makes their gains very limited right now. But that is not to say that we should be underestimating the Russian military, because that's not the case. And we have seen, as I've presented to you guys, the sheer lunacy within the Russian military. They simply don't care about their losses. They're going to step over the corpses and the bodies of their dead comrades. They're going to loot the bodies of their comrades. They're not going to be helping out. I've seen so many videos of just the sheer lack of humanity within the Russian military that I'm just not surprised about it anymore. And Ukraine doesn't have the choice, because Ukraine right now values life. Ukraine needs to preserve life, and they can't adopt the same tactics like the Russians do, unfortunately. So that's the situation around Pokrovsk and Velika Novosilka. The situation is not good, and I'm not sugarcoating this, but I do have a lot of hope that, and I am presenting you guys the facts that it's just because of the Ukraine strategy that they have adopted. They will simply try to pick their fights, and they're going to backpedal, and retreat and continue fighting, because there is no choice for Ukraine right now. We understand very well that the complete capitulation of Ukraine would mean the destruction of not only Ukraine, but also its society, its culture, its identity. Russia's going to go for that. It's a genocidal war after all. It's an existential question for the Ukrainians right now. So there's absolutely no question on giving up on the front line. And the Ukrainian military understands that very well, and they understands their assignment right now. But apart from the silver lining of the Russians having a severe shortage of everything right now, of armored vehicles, especially tanks and MTLBs and BTRs, another thing, the Ukrainian soldiers have stated that Russia has definitely reduced their assaults in the northern sector, that is in Kharkiv and Luhansk, because they simply also, on the Russian side, they start lacking manpower. And again, one of the facts that presents this is just the North Koreans, they're fighting for Russia right now in Kursk, and likely to fight in other areas, perhaps in occupied territories in Ukraine in the near future. Russia would not be turning towards North Korea if things were all good on the Russian side. Let's be clear. I think it's evident. So that also showcases that Russia has serious issues right now with its mobilizing and being able to recruit men for its fight. And as a matter of fact, I've been hearing rumors as well that Russia's actually they're not able to mobilize as many people now, and that their losses are higher than their recruitment levels per month. So each month as they pass, Russia is losing its manpower rather than increasing its manpower. So that remains to be confirmed, and I think we'll really start hearing about it more over the next few months if that is indeed the case. Because of course Russia's going to be hiding the numbers. They're going to be manipulating the numbers, and it's really hard to gauge if that is true or not, right? So over the next few months, we'll see if that is really a problem, because that would indicate as well that there's less and less Russians that are financially motivated to fight in Ukraine, because they understand the risks as well. They don't want to die for a one-way ticket, although there's plenty of Russians still willing to do that. But as time goes by, I think that less and less Russians are seeing the value of this war and this special military operation, as they like to call it. So let me know what you guys think about my comments here. It's kind of just a general kind of analysis of the situation, of why Ukraine is indeed still backpedaling in most sectors, and why it's really difficult for them to defend. And the other thing I want to mention as well, it's not just because of the manpower. It's also within the Ukraine military, if I am to bring a very pragmatic, unbiased analysis as well. This week alone, there was a scandal within Ukraine military because the Air Force, the Ukraine Air Force, the technicians and the maintenance crew started getting notices that they're going to be transferred into infantry. And that stirred a lot of anger within these Ukrainian soldiers that are part of the kind of maintenance crew of the Air Force, because they hold a very important position, right? Maintaining aircraft. That's very, very important for Ukraine. And that showcases that the system is extremely inefficient on the Ukrainian side as well, because Ukraine still has a military kind of doctrine and institutions that are still remnants of the Soviet era. And that is extremely hard to erase and rebuild. And we're seeing those signs when you have moments like these where, you know, soldiers that are supposed to be maintaining aircraft are now being told you're going to be infantry the other day. That's very, very bad, because we need to be utilizing, the Ukraine military needs to be utilizing its soldiers to the best of their capabilities. If you came in as a drone pilot, you're going to stay as a drone pilot. If you came in as a, an infantry man, an infantry soldier, you're going to stay like an infantry soldier, as an infantry soldier. If you're a medic, combat medic, you're going to stay as a combat medic. That's extremely important, right? And also on the Russian side, that's also been a huge problem as well. We've heard similar stories on the Russian side as well, but also on the Ukrainian side. And that is also creating a lot of tension, a lot of issues within the Ukrainian military, where the human resource is just not utilized efficiently. And that is causing a lot of problems, unfortunately. So that is also part of the problem for Ukraine, is that the military side and the leadership, the institutions are still archaic. They still haven't been modernized. The systems have not been adapted for efficiency on the Ukrainian side. So let me know what you guys think about my comments, my analysis here, but I hope you enjoyed this small map update. Now, I want to go back to a historic agreement between Britain, the UK, and Ukraine. So yesterday, Keir Starmer went to Kyiv for the very first time, and of course, he wanted to come with some good announcements, some good news. And this is an excellent historic announcement by the UK, essentially cementing an agreement, a 100-year agreement in cooperation between the UK and Ukraine, which will deepen defense cooperation between both countries, strengthen their military and defense industrial capabilities. It will include the development of the armed forces and cooperation between defense industrial bases, and strengthen Ukraine's defense procurement system, along many other agreements as well. The main takeaway here is that the UK essentially is saying that they believe in a strategic partnership with Ukraine for the long term. This is not just, we got your back for 2-3 years. It's, we got your back for the next century. That's a huge commitment. And I don't think the UK would just do it because, it's just good for the image. They're doing it because they really do believe in Ukraine being able to provide value not only to the UK, but also to the entire world. And Ukraine has a lot to offer. We've seen the type of innovation in several sectors, not only the military, that Ukraine has been able to do over the last few years since the war started, and especially in the military sector with all the drones, the missiles, the AI implementation, different types of things. Ukraine has really done a fantastic job in trying to become more independent, and that can be seen. And I think that the UK is betting on that as well, that Ukraine has a lot to offer to UK as well. It's not just a one-way street. Ukraine will also give back a lot to the UK. Keir Starmer also announced that they're going to be providing £4.5 billion in military assistance to Ukraine for 2025. That's a big announcement as well. And I'm expecting many more agreements with Ukraine and other European nations in the near future. I don't think the UK is the first and only one that will do this. So this is a very big deal. And a huge thank you to the UK, because the UK was one of the very few countries prior to the war that was committed to Ukraine. And remember Boris Johnson saying that I will give everything to Ukraine. I'll try to do everything I can to support Ukraine. And the British people understand very well what's at stake here. So big thank you to the UK people. You've been extremely valuable in the fight against Russia and their terrorism. So last but not least, some more good news, possible good news, I should say, because this is not a certainty, it's not definitive, but there's been some stories that have been running around in Russia, and so important these rumors have been that the Russian central bank had to come out and dismiss them. And we know that when the Kremlin dismisses something, it's usually because something's going on. And when they say something, you have to take it for granted and expect it to be the complete opposite. So if they're saying that everything is good, it's likely that everything is bad. So what I'm talking about here is essentially, we know that the interest rates in Russia are extremely high. They're close to 21%. As a matter of fact, in December, the head of the central bank wanted to even raise them even higher, and Putin begged her not to do that. So she kept it at 21%. So of course, with high interest rates, banks want to offer their customers short-term deposits with interesting interest rates. And some of them have been offering interest rates as high as 30% for people to deposit their money into these savings accounts, so they keep their money in these banks. And this essentially allowed the Russians have done this to receive around $68 billion in interest on their deposits in 2024. However, there's been some rumors around the Russian society, and family members or colleagues have been saying that, hey, I heard so and so has had their bank account frozen and they can no longer access it. They can no longer withdraw or transfer money into it. And it was so serious that, as you can see, the Russian central bank had to step in and say, no such things are happening. So whether this is happening or not, we don't know yet. But certainly, we understand very well that this could be the last resort option for Russia, when we know that they're bleeding money left and right now through all these sanctions that have been imposed, especially the last one, which is going to hurt the Russian oil and gas industry severely, with the shadow fleet being banned, and the heavy sanctions on the Russian oil and gas companies, Gazprom running massive deficits last year as well. And this year is going to be a catastrophe for Gazprom. So, all these sanctions are making the Russian state lose all the revenues, which are, of course, helping fuel the war in Ukraine. And of course, the Russians understand their history, because not so long ago, they experienced similar situations where many of them lost their savings through the hyperinflation after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Many of them again lost their savings in the banking sector meltdown in 1998. And of course, it's evident, if deposits are frozen, people will lose trust in banks, and the financial system is going to collapse very quickly afterwards. So there very well could be a bank run in 2025, because the Russian economy is just a disaster right now. And I really do believe, perhaps it's my optimistic side, that by the end of this year, the Russian economy is going to collapse. And when it's going to collapse, it's just going to take barely a few days for it to happen. And that will mean that Russia will have to impose some very serious last resort options. So let me know what you guys think about the Russian bank run. Do you think it's going to happen this year or in 2026, or we're still far away from that? Let me know what you guys think. And again, a huge thank you for support. This really motivates me to continue making videos, making updates, talking about the news, giving you my analysis of the things. So I'm very grateful for your support. I love reading your comments. I love reading your input. And a huge thank you again for supporting not only this channel, but the Ukrainian cause. With all that, thank you. Slava Ukraini.